At the edge of the galaxy, the planet Nix 7 lay like a cold, forgotten gem, spinning slowly around a dying sun. Few dared to approach this desolate region, where life was nothing more than a whispered legend lost in the shadows of the cosmos. And yet, this was exactly where Rian Solas, a lone explorer from Earth, intended to set foot. Rian, a rugged man with skin weathered by countless missions and eyes sharpened by an insatiable curiosity, had heard rumors of a rare being, a creature of unparalleled beauty who ruled this forsaken planet. The tales called her an alien queen, a creature as entrancing as she was deadly. Her form, they said, was mesmerizing beyond measure, yet her true intentions were a mystery. Known as Queen Nyla by the few native tribes left on Nix 7, she was said to glow like amethyst under the planet's dim sun and had the power to ensnare the minds of those who dared gaze upon her for too long. But Rian was not one to believe in myths. He was a man of science and ambition. His drive was fueled not only by the desire to explore the unknown, but by the thrill of facing the impossible and etching his name into the legacy of the most daring souls in the galaxy. His ship, Starlance, was now gliding down onto the rocky surface of Nix 7. The terrain was vast and barren, veiled in a thick mist that pulsed with static electricity, as though the very ground held a dormant energy. The planet exuded a strange calm, one that made Rian's chest tighten. Once he disembarked, Rian adjusted the multiple protective layers of his suit, activating its sensory shields. His radars scanned the area, picking up the thin, electrically charged air. Everything here seemed to vibrate, as if the ground itself were alive. Rian pressed the communicator on his wrist. "Starlance, report environment stability," he commanded, his tone calm but focused. "Environment stable, Captain Solas," replied the ship's robotic voice. He took a deep breath, stepping forward toward what appeared to be a nearby rock formation. It wasn't long before he noticed something unusual. A soft, pulsing light was emerging from an opening within the rocks, as if beckoning him toward a hidden passage. Rian hesitated, but curiosity took hold. Moving closer, he felt a strange pull, something beyond his control. In all his years of exploration, he'd never encountered anything quite like it. It was as if an invisible presence were guiding him forward. Determined, he stepped inside the opening. The cave was surprisingly illuminated from within. The walls and ceiling glistened with crystal formations that emitted a soothing, almost hypnotic glow. At the center of this ethereal cavern sat a figure, a woman, or something very close to one, resting on a throne of crystalline stone. She was Queen Nyla. Nyla's eyes met his, and her lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. Her gaze, a hypnotic shade of violet, seemed to pierce directly into Rian's soul. Her entire form was otherworldly radiant, as though every inch of her skin was sculpted from precious stones. She spoke no words, but Rian felt a wave of warmth wash over him, as if she were communicating directly with his mind. "Human, what do you seek in my domain?" Nyla's voice echoed in his head, her tone gentle but filled with authority, an insistent whisper winding its way into his thoughts. Rian tried to respond, but his voice caught in his throat. He felt completely exposed, an odd feeling for someone so accustomed to the unknown. Fighting his own tension, he finally managed to answer. I came in search of knowledge, Your Majesty. They say you're a legend among worlds, a vision no one has dared describe." Nyla tilted her head, a trace of amusement in her expression. "And what knowledge do you expect to find? Explorer? That which you already know, or truths you are afraid to face?" Her words struck something deep within him, a place Rian had long kept hidden. Nyla rose from her throne and glided toward him, her movements fluid as if she were floating. When she stopped just inches away, he could smell her, an intoxicating fragrance, strangely familiar, like the scent of a desire he'd never dared acknowledge. Rian struggled to breathe. He'd never felt such an intense pull, nor sensed such a profound danger. How could someone be so alluring and yet so perilous at once? Every fiber of his being urged him to leave, but he was paralyzed, held captive by her presence. "Do you desire me, Rian Solas?" Her voice softened, though her power over him grew stronger with every syllable. If so, you must prove your worth, or Nyx 7 will be the last planet your human eyes will ever see. Her words reverberated in Rian's mind, leaving him shaken. He realized, in that instant, that this was far more than curiosity or even attraction. This was an obsession, a dangerous craving that lured him to the edge of reason and submission. As he opened his mouth to reply, Queen Nyla's smile broadened, her expression a blend of secrets and promises he could never hope to comprehend. He felt an invisible net tightening around him, binding him to her in a way he couldn't explain. And in that moment, he understood. He was trapped in a game far older and far darker than anything he'd ever known. Rian Solas could not tear his eyes from Queen Nyla. Every instinct he had, every fragment of rational thought, urged him to turn away, to flee while he still could. But his body was unresponsive, bound by a force beyond any technology or science he knew. Nyla's hand hovered just above his chest, her fingers radiating a soft violet light. The closer her hand came, the heavier his heart pounded, as though it could sense a presence both alien and all-consuming. Nyla's gaze sharpened, her eyes narrowing slightly, an expression that seemed equal parts curiosity and predatory intent. "I can feel it in you, Rian," her voice whispered into his mind, intimate and chilling. An explorer, a seeker of secrets, yet so bound by desire. Rian's pulse quickened. "Your Majesty," he managed, his voice barely audible. "I don't know what you mean." Nyla let out a low, throaty laugh that echoed through the cavern. She moved gracefully, circling him, studying him as though he were a specimen under examination. Her hair, dark and shimmering like liquid amethyst, flowed around her shoulders, her movements mesmerizing and deliberate. Rian could feel her eyes on him, penetrating, as if she could see into parts of himself he had long hidden. "Don't pretend you're not affected, Rian," she said, her tone softer now, almost playful. She stopped just behind him, her breath warm against the back of his neck. "You came here for me, or rather, for what I represent. But you don't understand what you're asking for." Rian swallowed hard, his throat dry. He could barely form a response. He had been to countless planets, faced dangers beyond imagination, yet nothing had prepared him for this. What was this sensation? Fear? Longing? The words came tumbling out before he could stop them. Why am I here?" he whispered, half to himself, half to her. Nyla moved in front of him, her face inches from his. "Why, indeed?" she murmured, one eyebrow arching as though in challenge. "The question isn't why you're here, Rian. It's why you want to stay." Without warning, she raised a hand, and Rian felt a shockwave course through his body. Suddenly, images burst to life in his mind. Memories of his past missions, worlds he had charted, faces he had forgotten. Yet, amidst the chaos, one memory stood out: Earth. He saw the face of someone he had once loved, someone he had left behind in his endless pursuit of the unknown. The pain of that memory washed over him, raw and unforgiving. Rian staggered, clutching his head. "Stop, please." But Nyla only smiled, watching him with a mix of fascination and cold detachment. "You see, Rian, all humans carry regrets, failures, longings. You travel light years to escape them, but they're always there, haunting you like shadows." Rian's eyes snapped open, and he looked at her, breathless and shaken. "Why are you showing me this?" he demanded, his voice raw with desperation. Her expression softened, though her eyes remained intense, almost glowing. "Because you must confront what you truly desire if you wish to survive here. Nyx 7 feeds on hidden truths, secrets buried too deep to face. Only those who can bear the weight of their past may remain." The realization hit him like a punch to the chest. It was a test. Nyla was more than just a queen. She was a gatekeeper of sorts, someone who could see into the deepest recesses of his mind. And she wouldn't let him leave unless he was willing to face his own shadows. "Then, let me prove myself," Rian said, his voice steadier now, though his heart hammered in his chest. "Tell me what you want from me." A glint of amusement flickered across her face. So eager. Very well, Rian. I'll give you the chance to show your worth. With a graceful wave of her hand, the cavern around them shifted. Rian blinked, trying to adjust his vision as the crystalline walls dissolved, morphing into a landscape of sharp cliffs overlooking an endless black sea. Stars glimmered in the sky, and a strange mist clung to the ground, swirling around his feet like the whispers of lost souls. This is the proving ground, Nyla said, her voice like a melody drifting through the mist. Here your intentions will be laid bare. Only the truth will protect you. Now step forward. Rian hesitated, but the look in Nyla's eyes left him no choice. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, feeling the mist swirl and thicken around him. The air grew colder, sharper, until it felt as though he were breathing ice. His body shivered involuntarily. And then he saw it. A figure in the mist, shrouded and faint. Took him a moment to recognize who it was. His breath caught in his throat. It was Elias, his old mentor, the man who had trained him, who had once been as close to him as family. The last time Rian had seen him was on an abandoned space station, years ago. They had argued over a mission, one Rian had insisted on pursuing, despite Elias's warnings. It had ended in disaster. Elias had disappeared in the chaos, and Rian had never forgiven himself. But here he was, or rather, some echo of him, staring at Rian with a gaze both sorrowful and accusing. Rian, the figure said, voice hollow, echoing as though from a great distance. Why did you leave me? Rian froze, every muscle locked in place. No, you're not real. You can't be. But the figure stepped closer, the mist parting to reveal eyes filled with anguish and betrayal. You abandoned me, Rian. I trusted you, and you left me to die. Rian took a step back, his heart pounding as he struggled to breathe. The guilt, the shame. It all came rushing back, a flood he had spent years burying deep within himself. And yet, here it was, a wound laid bare before him. I didn't know, he whispered, clenching his fists. I didn't know what would happen. I didn't mean. Enough. Nyla's voice cut through the air, commanding and sharp. She appeared beside him, her expression unreadable as she looked between him and the apparition. Face him, Rian. Face what you did. Or Nyx 7 will consume you. Rian forced himself to meet Elias's gaze, his chest tight. I failed you, he admitted, his voice breaking. I was reckless. I thought I knew better. And because of that, you suffered. The apparition of Elias softened, the accusation in his eyes fading, replaced by a faint glimmer of peace. With a final nod, the figure dissolved, fading back into the mist, leaving Rian alone with Nyla. He sank to his knees, drained, feeling as though he had been stripped of everything. Nyla approached him, her expression inscrutable. Well done, Rian Solas. But this is only the beginning. To walk my path, you must surrender your illusions and bare your soul. Only then will you be ready. Rian looked up at her, his body trembling. What happens next? She smiled, her eyes gleaming with both mystery and the faintest trace of admiration. The path is different for each. The question, Rian, is how much you are willing to lose to be close to me. A shiver ran down his spine. He knew he was in far deeper than he had anticipated. But now, his curiosity was more than just curiosity. It was need. It was desire. And the price of leaving her was far too high. Rian's heart pounded as he knelt in the cold mist of the proving ground. Nyla's presence lingered beside him, an unyielding force of beauty and power. Her words echoed in his mind. To walk her path, he must bare his soul. But how much of himself was he willing to reveal to this alien queen, to this being who seemed to reach into his deepest regrets, his darkest memories? With a wave of her hand, Nyla summoned another vision from the mist. The landscape shifted, melting into a darkened room. The scent of stale air and metal filled his nostrils. He was back on Sela 4, a planet he had once visited on a reconnaissance mission that had gone terribly wrong. The memory was vivid. He stood in a tight, dimly lit corridor, the metallic walls streaked with red. Alara, his former partner, was beside him, her expression tense, her hands gripping a control panel as they worked frantically to override a security lockdown. The mission had been dangerous, the risks high, and he had made a choice that haunted him to this day. Rian, her voice whispered, pulling him back to that fateful moment. You told me we'd get out together. You promised. The memory seemed so real. He could feel her presence, hear the desperation in her voice. He knew what was coming, and a cold fear settled in his chest. He watched helplessly as his past self turned to Alara, hesitation flashing in his eyes. He had known the odds were impossible, that they were seconds from being discovered. And, in a moment of panic, he had made the call to leave her behind, to escape with the information they'd come for. The decision had saved his life and ended hers. Alara, I didn't, Rian whispered, reaching out, his hand trembling as if to hold her, as if to change what was already done. Is this how you honor your promises? Rian? Nyla's voice interrupted, sharp and merciless. She watched him, her eyes reflecting an intense, almost savage curiosity. Leaving behind those who trust you? You say you seek the unknown, yet all you do is escape from the past. You run from yourself. Rian's throat tightened. He felt as though he were sinking, trapped in the cold, crushing weight of his own guilt. It was as if Nyla had stripped him bare, and the truth of his choices stood before him, undeniable and unforgiving. He tried to meet Nyla's gaze, but the shame was overwhelming. I was wrong, he admitted, his voice breaking. I was selfish. I valued the mission above her life. I wanted to be a hero, but it cost me everything. For a long moment, there was only silence. And then, to his surprise, Nyla's expression softened, her eyes tracing his face with something almost like sympathy. Painful as it is, Rian, truth is the only way forward. But understand, there are truths that cost more than lives. As she spoke, the vision of Alara faded, leaving Rian shivering, drained but strangely relieved, as if acknowledging the truth had lessened its weight. He looked up at Nyla, trying to make sense of her words. What do you mean? But before she could answer, the ground trembled beneath them, and the air filled with an ominous hum. Nyla's gaze sharpened, and she raised a hand, gesturing for him to stand. It appears we have visitors, she said, her voice steady but tense. You're about to face more than your memories. Rian, follow me. She turned and moved swiftly toward the edge of the cavern, and Rian hurried after her, his mind reeling. He couldn't fathom what Nyla meant by visitors. Was this part of the test? Another of her mind games? They emerged into the open air, and Rian immediately saw them. Ships, dark and sleek, hovering above the planet's rocky surface. They bore no insignia, but he recognized their design immediately. They were Vanir Syndicate ships, infamous across the galaxy for their ruthless mercenaries and near-pirate tactics. One of the ships began to descend, its lights illuminating the area. Rian's chest tightened. The Vanir Syndicate rarely traveled without a purpose, and he had no doubt their purpose involved him, or perhaps the very queen who now stood beside him. Stay close, Nyla murmured, her tone laced with quiet strength. These creatures seek to claim what they cannot understand. They will find Nyx-7 unyielding, but I would rather not waste my energy dealing with them. A group of armored figures disembarked, their movements deliberate, weapons drawn. They approached cautiously, their leader, a man with a scar running the length of his face, stepping forward, his helmet scanning them. Rian tensed as the man's gaze settled on Nyla, a greedy gleam in his eyes. Well, the man sneered. The rumors were true. There is a queen here. Nyla regarded him with cool disinterest, her expression unreadable. Your presence is an intrusion, mercenary. Leave while you still can. The leader laughed, a harsh guttural sound. You misunderstand, your majesty. I'm here to bring you in. You're a rare treasure, and the syndicate has plans for you. Rian clenched his fists, anger rising in him. He could see the smug confidence in the man's stance, the way he looked at Nyla as if she were something to be possessed. But Nyla remained still, her expression unfazed. The mercenary leader's gaze shifted to Rian, his smirk widening. And who's this? A loyal subject? Leave him out of this, Nyla replied, her voice like ice. Your quarrel is with me. But know that you have overstepped your bounds. The leader raised his weapon, pointing it directly at her. Oh, I don't think you're in any position to make demands, Your Majesty. I suggest you come with us peacefully, or we'll make things unpleasant. Nyla tilted her head, her eyes flashing with a fierce, dangerous light. You should have listened when you had the chance. Before the mercenary could respond, Nyla raised her hand, and the ground beneath them trembled violently. Cracks snaked across the rocky surface, and a wave of energy erupted from her, sending the soldiers staggering back, their weapons clattering to the ground. The leader shouted orders, but it was too late. Nyla's power surged around her, a swirling vortex of violet light that seemed to pulse with her fury. Rian watched in awe, feeling the raw energy radiating from her, a force both beautiful and terrifying. It was as if Nyla were the living embodiment of Nyx 7 itself, the planet's very soul manifesting through her. The mercenaries scrambled to retreat, but one by one, they fell to the ground, as if crushed by an invisible weight. Only the leader remained standing, his defiance faltering as he stared at her, fear now evident in his eyes. Nyla stepped forward, her gaze fixed on him. You came here seeking to claim me as a prize, but you have failed to understand that I am no one's possession. I am Nyx 7, and I do not forgive trespassers. With a final wave of her hand, the leader crumpled to the ground, his body still as stone. Silence fell over the rocky terrain, and the violet light around Nyla faded, leaving only the faint, pulsating glow of the planet's mist. Rian released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He looked at Nyla, his heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and awe. She turned to him, her expression calm but with a lingering intensity. You didn't have to save me, he stammered, feeling an inexplicable gratitude. She regarded him for a long moment, then spoke, her voice softer but still commanding. There are many things you have yet to understand, Rian Solas. Do not assume that my actions were for your sake alone. As they stood in the aftermath, Rian felt the weight of his purpose settle within him. This was no ordinary encounter, no simple exploration. Nyla's power, her command, the unyielding strength of Nyx 7. He was drawn to it, to her, in ways he could not yet comprehend. But one thing was clear. Leaving was no longer an option. He would stay, he would face whatever trials Nyla demanded, and he would uncover the truths she held, even if it meant risking everything he thought he knew about himself. The mist settled over the rocky ground, cloaking the remnants of the Syndicate's failed assault. Rian stood in silence beside Nyla, his breath still unsteady. He was acutely aware of her power, the raw, uncontainable energy she had just unleashed upon the intruders. The weight of her command over this planet was staggering. Nyla turned to him, her gaze penetrating, as though reading his thoughts. What you witnessed here is but a fraction of what Nyx 7 can do, Rian. This planet, this land, it exists beyond the boundaries of what you understand. Rian swallowed, trying to find his voice amidst the awe and lingering fear. I don't doubt it, but what I don't understand is why. Why keep me here? You could have sent me away like them. Nyla's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. You're not like them, Rian. They came to claim what they did not understand. But you came because you were willing to risk everything. You came seeking more than mere conquest. Rian shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. It was as if she saw through his bravado, peeling away the layers he had carefully constructed over years of exploration. I thought I knew what I was looking for, he admitted quietly. But now I'm not sure I even understand myself. Nyla regarded him for a moment before gesturing for him to follow. Come with me. You have more to see. They moved through the mist, their steps silent as Nyla led him down a winding path through towering rock formations. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to thrum with a low, pulsing energy, like a heartbeat echoing from the planet's core. Rian felt it vibrating through his bones, an unsettling rhythm that made his skin prickle. The path opened up into a vast chamber, unlike anything Rian had ever seen. The walls were lined with crystalline structures, each one casting a soft, violet glow. In the center of the chamber stood a massive obelisk, carved from the same crystal but darker, its surface shifting like liquid shadows. The obelisk hummed with energy, and Rian couldn't tear his eyes away from it. "This is the heart of Nyx," Nyla announced, her voice low and reverent. "It is the pulse of this world, the source of its power. Few have ever seen it. Fewer still have survived its influence." Rian approached cautiously, feeling a magnetic pull toward the obelisk. The closer he got, the more intense the hum became, as if it were resonating with something deep inside him. He felt a rush of memories, thoughts, emotions, fragments of his life playing out in his mind's eye. What is it doing?" he whispered, entranced by the dark, shifting crystal. Nyla's gaze never left him. The heart of Nyx reveals what lies buried. It draws out the hidden desires, the fears, the regrets, the parts of you that you keep locked away. Only those who can confront their true selves may draw strength from it. Rian's heart raced. He knew he was standing at the edge of something vast and dangerous, but he couldn't pull back. He reached out, his fingers grazing the surface of the obelisk, and a surge of energy shot through him, filling his mind with visions. He saw himself on Earth, standing alone on a dark street, watching as a figure disappeared into the distance. It was his father, a man who had left him when he was just a boy, disappearing without a word. The pain of abandonment, the questions that had haunted him for so long, they flooded back, raw and unfiltered. "You left me," Rian murmured, his voice trembling, as if he were speaking to the memory itself. "Why did you leave me?" The vision shifted, and he saw himself years later, signing up for his first mission. The rush of freedom, the thrill of leaving everything behind. It had been a way to escape, to prove he didn't need anyone. He had convinced himself that the vastness of space would fill the void inside him. But the heart of Nyx was relentless. It showed him his failures, his broken relationships, the people he had hurt, the promises he had broken in his relentless pursuit of glory. And then it showed him Nyla, her face as he saw it now, powerful and inscrutable. But beneath it all, he sensed a deep sadness, an isolation that mirrored his own. The visions faded, and Rian staggered back, his body shaking. He felt stripped bare, as though every wall he had built, every shield he had held up, had been torn down in an instant. Nyla watched him, her expression unreadable. "Do you see now, Rian? The path you walk, the choices you have made, they are not so different from mine. We both seek something we cannot have." Rian looked at her, struggling to steady his breathing. What is it you seek?" Nyla hesitated, her eyes distant. "I was once like you, a wanderer, a seeker of knowledge. I came to Nyx 7 long ago, drawn by its mysteries, its promise of endless understanding. But the heart does not offer knowledge without a price. It took from me what I held most dear, binding me to this world, making me its keeper." Her words hung in the air, heavy with an ancient sorrow. Rian felt a pang of empathy, a connection he couldn't explain. "So you're a prisoner here?" She met his gaze, her expression hardening. "A queen, a prisoner, the titles are meaningless. I am what Nyx 7 requires me to be. And now, Rian Solas, it requires you." Rian's chest tightened. "Me? But I'm no one. I have no power like yours." Nyla's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "Power takes many forms. You have the strength to confront your own shadows, to face truths others would run from. That is rare. Nyx 7 sensed it, and it drew you here. You are bound to this planet now, as I am." A sense of dread crept over him. "Are you saying that I can never leave?" She tilted her head, her expression softening. "Not as you are now. But if you can prove yourself worthy, if you can confront the heart of Nyx and emerge with your soul intact, then perhaps, just perhaps, you may yet find a way out." Rian's mind spun, grappling with the weight of her words. He had come here seeking knowledge, adventure, never expecting to become ensnared in a cosmic game of survival and self-discovery. But as he looked into Nyla's eyes, he realized he could no longer turn back. Not now. He was bound to her, bound to Nyx 7, by forces he could barely comprehend. "What do I have to do?" he asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil within him. Nyla stepped closer, her gaze intense. "You must confront what the heart reveals, without fear or denial. Every secret, every regret, every desire you've kept hidden will surface. And only by accepting them, embracing them, can you hope to master the heart's power." Rian swallowed, his determination hardening. He would face whatever lay ahead, even if it tore him apart. Because in that moment, he realized something profound. He needed this challenge, this path, as much as Nyx 7 needed him. It was as if his entire life had been leading to this moment, to this queen, to this ancient power that demanded everything from him. "Then I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. Nyla regarded him with a mixture of approval and something else. Something almost tender, though he couldn't be sure. "Very well, Rian Solas," she murmured. "But know this. Once you begin, there is no turning back. And when you face the heart, it will know no mercy." With a wave of her hand, the mist thickened around him, pulling him into the depths of the chamber. Rian felt the world shift, reality bending around him as he was plunged into the heart's embrace. In the darkness, he felt it. A presence, immense and ancient, reaching out to him, pulling him into the depths of his own soul. And he knew, with a certainty that shook him to the core, that this journey would change him forever. Rian's senses were swallowed by the dark, his awareness drawn into a vast, echoing silence that was more than mere emptiness. It was as if the darkness itself held weight, pressing on him, relentless. He stood suspended in the void, his breath shallow, waiting, though he didn't know for what. Slowly, a faint glow began to materialize ahead, pulsing like a heartbeat. He knew instantly what it was. The heart of Nyx. Its energy surged, filling the darkness with flashes of muted purple and dark blue, casting deep shadows across the void. Rian took a tentative step forward, his pulse matching the rhythm of the ancient crystal. He could feel it probing him, testing him, almost as if it were searching for cracks in his soul. A whisper brushed against his mind, faint at first, then growing louder, murmuring in voices he recognized all too well. The faces of his past began to emerge from the darkness, floating around him like specters. They were people he had left behind, those he had disappointed, those whose lives he had touched only to withdraw from again, leaving them as casualties in his quest for something he could never name. As each face appeared, he felt the old wounds open up, raw and aching. Then, a new figure appeared. A child, small, thin, with wide, haunted eyes. He realized, with a painful start, that it was himself. Rian saw the child reach out, his face shadowed with confusion and hurt, his small hand hovering, wanting to grasp at something that wasn't there. "You left me alone," the child's voice echoed, soft but piercing. "You said you didn't need anyone. But I'm still here, Rian. Waiting." A surge of guilt crashed over him. He had spent years pretending he was unaffected by his past, that he was stronger for having abandoned those early pains. But here, in the grip of Nyx's heart, his defenses shattered. He could feel the emptiness he'd carried all this time, a loneliness he had buried under layers of ambition and defiance. He turned away from the child, ashamed, and came face to face with another figure. She was familiar, her face a painful reminder of a part of himself he had long denied. It was Allure, his old partner. Her expression was weary, but her eyes were full of compassion. "Rian," she said, her voice gentle, "you always ran, even when I needed you most." His throat tightened, and he struggled to look at her. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought the mission mattered more than the people who believed in you?" Allure asked, her gaze piercing. "I trusted you. You trusted the mission." Rian staggered, feeling as though the weight of his own choices was pressing him into the ground. He had chased distant stars, bound himself to worlds he barely knew, And for what? He had told himself he was pursuing knowledge, but the truth was that he had been running, always running, leaving behind the parts of himself he feared to confront. The figures around him faded, their expressions lingering in his mind like phantom aches, and he was left once more in the vast silence, alone with the pulsing glow of the heart. He closed his eyes, drawing in a deep breath. "I'm sorry," he murmured, though the words felt feeble. But even in that small admission, he felt something release inside him, a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying. He opened his eyes, and for the first time, he felt the heart's pulse shift, almost as if it were listening. The darkness swirled, then condensed, forming into a single figure, Nyla. But there was something different about her now. She was no longer the imposing queen, but a shadowed figure, her expression softer, her eyes holding an old, deep sadness. She looked at him with something close to understanding. "You see now, don't you?" Nyla's voice was softer, almost tender. "The heart demands truth. It exposes what we cannot face, what we bury. Only by embracing it can we move forward." Rian nodded, his voice steady but quiet. "I think I understand. All my life I've been running from my past, from myself. I thought I could find meaning in exploration, but I was escaping." Nyla's gaze held his, unwavering. "And now, Rian, you must decide what you are willing to become. Because here, on Nyx 7, the only path forward is through your own shadows. The heart will claim you, or it will forge you." Her words lingered, and Rian felt their weight. He sensed that this was more than just a test of his past. It was a choice about who he would be, about whether he could stand alongside Nyla in this ancient, unknowable power. But as he opened his mouth to respond, a cold breeze swept through the cavern, chilling him to the bone. Shadows crept along the edges of the chamber, deeper and darker than the ones before. He saw Nyla's expression change, her calm composure shifting to something sharper, more alert. "They've come," she murmured, her eyes narrowing as she glanced around. Rian felt a surge of unease. "Who? The Syndicate?" Nyla shook her head, her gaze fixed on the shadows swirling around them. "No, this is something older. Nyx 7 has awakened something beyond the Syndicate's reach. Something that has slept here far longer than I have ruled." The shadows coalesced, forming twisted, nightmarish figures, their shapes flickering and shifting as though made of smoke and darkness. Their hollow eyes fixed on Rian and Nyla, filled with a malice that felt ancient, primal. Nyla stepped forward, her expression resolute. "These are the keepers of Nyx's heart, guardians bound to protect it from any who seek its power without understanding its price." One of the shadowy figures lunged toward Rian, its form swirling and shifting as it closed in on him. He barely had time to react before Nyla raised her hand, a wave of violet energy surging forth to block the creature's path. The keeper recoiled, hissing, its form dissipating momentarily before reforming. "Stand back, Rian," Nyla commanded, her voice fierce. "The keepers won't let you pass unless they sense you are worthy. They are bound to test you as I have. But this test will be different." Rian nodded, bracing himself as the keepers circled around him, their dark forms gliding like phantoms. He felt their gaze penetrating him, searching, weighing every flaw, every scar. One of the keepers drifted close, its voice a rasping whisper. "Do you seek power?" it asked, its tone dripping with disdain. Rian took a deep breath, forcing himself to meet its hollow gaze. "No," he said, his voice steady. "I seek understanding. I want to know myself, to understand the choices I've made." Another keeper approached, its form shifting, merging into multiple shadowed faces that whispered in unison. "You have abandoned, betrayed, destroyed. Do you dare call yourself worthy?" Rian's chest tightened, but he held firm. "I've made mistakes. I won't deny that. But I'm ready to face them. I won't run anymore." The shadows swirled, their whispers filling the air, blending into a cacophony of voices, each one dredging up fragments of his past, his fears, his regrets. But Rian stood his ground, refusing to look away, refusing to hide. The whispers faded, and the shadows grew still. Slowly, One by one, the keepers retreated, their forms melting back into the darkness. Rian exhaled, feeling the weight of their presence lift, replaced by a profound stillness. Nyla stepped forward, her expression unreadable. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle. You have faced the keepers, Rian, and they have granted you passage. But the heart's true test lies ahead. You must go alone. Rian met her gaze, feeling a surge of gratitude mixed with fear. He knew that whatever awaited him, it would be the most difficult trial yet. But he also knew he couldn't turn back now. Not after everything he had faced, everything he had uncovered within himself. Thank you, Nyla, he murmured, his voice filled with quiet resolve. Nyla inclined her head, her eyes lingering on him. Go forward, Rian Solas. And remember, only truth can guide you now. With a final, steadying breath, Rian stepped toward the heart, the pulsing light growing brighter with each step, filling his vision, until all he could see was the blinding radiance of Nyx 7's power. As Rian stepped deeper into the light, the world around him seemed to dissolve. He was engulfed by the blinding radiance of Nyx's heart, its energy both overwhelming and intoxicating, pressing into his mind like a relentless tide. The brightness shifted, becoming a dense mist that swallowed him whole. For a moment, he was weightless, adrift in a world where neither time nor place existed, only the intense, all-encompassing pulse of the heart. Then, as if drawn from some distant memory, a new scene unfolded around him. He was no longer in Nyx 7's cavern. He stood instead in a quiet, dimly lit room filled with scattered artifacts and charts. He recognized it instantly. His quarters aboard the SS Aegis, his very first ship. The scent of metal and stale air was unmistakable. He felt a strange pang of nostalgia mixed with dread. This was a place he hadn't seen in years, a reminder of the person he once was, before he became the man he was now. In the dim light, he noticed a figure seated on his bunk, hunched over, head in his hands. Rian's heart skipped a beat. It was himself, his younger self, haunted and weary, just as he'd been all those years ago. He watched, transfixed, as his younger self lifted his head, staring blankly at a photograph in his hand. Rian moved closer, his gaze landing on the photo. It was a picture of his family, taken before his father had abandoned them. In the image, they were all smiling, arms wrapped around one another. The younger Rian's fingers brushed the photo lightly, as if he could reach through time and grasp what he had lost. You were angry, Rian murmured to his younger self, feeling the long-buried resentment well up within him. You wanted to prove that you didn't need anyone, that you could make it on your own. The younger Rian looked up, his gaze haunted, meeting Rian's eyes as though he could hear him. I thought if I kept moving, kept exploring, I could leave it all behind. His voice was rough, hollow. But it just followed me, didn't it? The words stung, resonating deeply. Rian had spent his life chasing stars, exploring planets, charting galaxies, all to outrun the emptiness that seemed to follow him. He had thought distance and adventure would make him whole. But here, in this vision, he was forced to face the truth. You can't escape yourself, he whispered, almost as if he were confessing to a long-held secret. Not by leaving others behind. The scene blurred, dissolving into a haze of light once more. Rian blinked, and suddenly, he found himself in yet another memory. This time on the surface of Sela 4, under the same red sky where he had left Alara. The air was thick, the atmosphere cold and desolate. He remembered this place with painful clarity, the way he'd left her behind when their mission had turned to chaos. And there she was, standing just a few feet away, her expression unreadable. The sight of her twisted his heart, filling him with a guilt that nearly drove him to his knees. Alara, he choked, his voice thick with regret. I didn't mean to abandon me? She interrupted, her gaze unwavering. No, I know. It wasn't supposed to happen like that, right? You were just following orders, just doing what was necessary. Rian shook his head, every word cutting him deeper. I was scared. I thought if I saved the mission, it would make it right. that it would somehow make up for what I did. Allure stepped closer, her eyes softening, though her voice was still laced with pain. You can't fill a void with sacrifice, Rian. No amount of success, no number of victories, will ever change what you left behind. He looked down, feeling the weight of her words. She was right. His life had been one long, desperate quest to fill a void that could never be filled. Not with glory, not with adventure, not with conquest. He had abandoned people, hurt those who had cared for him, all in the name of something he barely understood himself. As he raised his head, the image of Allure began to fade, her form dissolving back into the mist. He reached out, but she was gone, leaving only the whisper of her voice in his mind. Stop running, Rian. You'll never outrun yourself. The mist thickened once more, swirling around him, and then faded, revealing the heart of Nyx looming before him again. Its dark, shifting surface pulsating with energy. This time, though, it no longer felt like an impassive monolith. It felt alive, as if it were watching him, waiting for him to take the next step. Rian clenched his fists, steadying his breath. He understood now. The heart wasn't just showing him his past. It was stripping him down to his essence, forcing him to confront the person he had become. And he realized, with a jolt, that there was only one way forward. With a deep breath, he placed both hands on the heart, feeling its power surge through him like lightning. It burned, intense and unyielding, filling him with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. He was not a conqueror. He was not an explorer. He was a man haunted by his own choices, a man seeking forgiveness he could only grant himself. Nyx, if you can hear me, he murmured. His voice steady despite the intensity of the heart's energy. I surrender. I won't run anymore. I'm ready to face whatever comes next. A surge of energy exploded from the heart, enveloping him in blinding light. Rian's vision blurred, and he felt himself falling weightless, as if the heart itself were drawing him into its depths. When the light faded, he found himself back in the vast, crystal-lined cavern, lying on the cold ground. The air was still, and the mist had thinned, leaving the chamber bathed in a dim violet glow. Slowly, he pushed himself up, feeling as though he had been reborn, stripped of every shield, every defense he had once held. Nyla stood nearby, watching him with a rare, soft expression. Her gaze held something new, something almost like pride. You did it, Rian, she said quietly. You have faced the heart, and it has judged you worthy. Few have come this far. Rian took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of her words. He had passed some kind of test, though the journey had left him raw, exposed. He looked up at her, a question lingering on his lips. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Nyla's expression grew somber, though her eyes remained warm. Now you choose. You have seen the truth of yourself, and you have confronted the darkness within. But the choice remains. Do you stay here, bound to Nyx 7, or do you seek a different path? Rian looked down, feeling the pull of the heart even now, a faint but insistent call. He understood that staying here would mean devoting himself to Nyx 7, to the ancient power that had reshaped him. But he also knew that leaving would mean taking what he had learned and carrying it forward, letting the pain and understanding guide him. He hesitated, glancing back at the heart, then at Nyla. What about you? You're bound here, aren't you? Nyla's gaze softened, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of longing in her eyes. Yes, I am Nyx 7's guardian, its keeper. This is my path. But your life is still your own, Rian. You are free to choose. Rian felt the enormity of the decision settle over him. He had come to Nyx 7 seeking adventure, knowledge, but he had found something far deeper, far more personal. He had found himself, his truth, laid bare in the depths of the heart. And now, as he looked into Nyla's eyes, he realized that this was his chance to start anew, to choose a path that wasn't driven by escape or conquest, but by purpose. I want, he began, his voice steady, to take what I've learned and make it mean something. I don't want to keep running, Nyla. I want to live my life to seek without fear. And I want to remember you, and Nyx 7, as the place that showed me who I am. Nyla nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving his. Then go, Rian Solas. But know that Nyx 7 will always be with you. The heart has marked you, and you carry its knowledge now. You are part of it as it is part of you. With one final, lingering look, Rian felt the connection between them. A bond forged in darkness and truth, something neither of them could fully explain, yet both understood. He knew he would carry her with him, wherever he went. As he turned to leave the cavern, the faint pulsing of the heart resonated within him, a reminder of the journey he had endured. He walked forward, feeling lighter, clearer, the shadows of his past finally. Rian walked away from the heart of Nyx, the cavern's silence pressing on him like a final goodbye. He knew he was leaving something profound behind, something that had reshaped his soul. Yet he also felt a deep certainty, a quiet power stirring within him, as if the very essence of Nyx 7 had fused with his own. Nyla followed him in silence, her presence a steady comfort in the eerie glow of the cavern. As they reached the edge of the heart's chamber, Rian paused, looking back at the ancient crystal one last time. It pulsed with a steady rhythm, no longer the oppressive force that had once overwhelmed him, but something more like a companion, a quiet heartbeat that matched his own. The heart has chosen you, Rian, Nyla said softly, her voice carrying a weight of finality. It has left its mark on you. Remember, this is not the end. Only the beginning of a journey that will follow you across the stars. Rian nodded, understanding the depth of her words. There was no undoing what he had learned here, no way to return to the man he had once been. But the fear that had once haunted him was gone, replaced by a calm resolve. He was ready to face whatever lay beyond Nyx 7, to carry the lessons of the heart with him. They left the chamber in silence, retracing their steps through the crystal-lined passageway. The mist had thinned, the oppressive energy dissipated, but Rian could still feel the faint pulse of Nyx's heart within him, as if it were guiding his steps. Finally, they emerged from the cavern and into the open air, the sky above a dark violet, scattered with distant stars that glimmered like silent witnesses. Nyla stopped, and Rian turned to face her. Her expression was thoughtful, her violet eyes fixed on him with an intensity that was both familiar and mysterious. In that moment, Rian felt the depth of their connection. A bond forged through shared secrets, a mutual understanding that transcended words. You carry a piece of Nyx 7 within you now, Rian, she said, her voice low and steady. You will always be bound to this place, as I am. But the difference is you are free to leave, to seek your own path, to choose. He studied her, feeling the gravity of her words. And what about you, Nyla? You've been here for so long, guarding the heart. Do you ever want to leave? A flicker of sadness crossed her face, and for the first time, Rian saw the traces of her own burdens, the cost of her duty to Nyx 7. Long ago, I thought I would leave. I believed I could walk away, that my connection to Nyx 7 was temporary. But the heart, its power is relentless. Once it claims you, it binds you to its purpose. I am Nyx 7's guardian, and until the planet's pulse fades, my fate is here. Rian's chest tightened at her words, a feeling of helplessness washing over him. He wished he could offer her a way out, a release from the endless duty that kept her tied to this isolated world. Nyla, if there were a way to break that bond, to set you free, some things aren't meant to be broken. Rian, she interrupted, her tone gentle yet resolute. The heart is ancient. It's well older than any one life. I am its keeper, and that is my path. But I find peace knowing that my purpose has meaning, that my presence here serves something greater. And now, a part of that purpose lives in you. He looked away, struggling to accept that she was beyond his reach. The weight of her sacrifice, her unbreakable bond to this place, was a burden he could barely imagine. And yet, she bore it with a calm dignity, her resolve unwavering. After a moment, Nyla reached into a fold of her cloak and pulled out a small, crystalline pendant. It glowed faintly, pulsing with the same violet energy as the heart. She extended it to him, her fingers brushing his as he took it. The pendant was warm, humming with a faint, steady rhythm. Take this, Rian. It is a fragment of the heart, a reminder of what you have learned here. It will guide you, protect you, and should you ever lose your way, it will help you find your path. He held the pendant, feeling its warmth spread through him, a quiet assurance that he would carry a part of Nyla and Nyx 7 with him, no matter where he traveled. Thank you, Nyla, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. For everything. She nodded, her expression softening. Remember, Rian, strength comes from within, but so does peace. The heart has shown you both. Don't forget them. They stood in silence, the weight of their parting heavy between them. Rian wanted to say more, to express the depth of his gratitude, the connection he felt with her. But words felt inadequate, too small to capture the enormity of what he had experienced, of what she had given him. Goodbye, Nyla, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. She inclined her head, her gaze steady and unwavering. Goodbye, Rian Solas. May your journey bring you the peace you seek. With a final nod, Rian turned and began walking toward his ship, his steps slow and reluctant. As he reached the crest of the rocky terrain, he glanced back one last time. Nyla stood there, a solitary figure against the vast expanse of Nyx 7, her form silhouetted against the darkening sky. She raised a hand in farewell, her face unreadable, yet her presence a constant comfort. He took a deep breath and entered his ship, the familiar hum of the engines filling the air as he powered up. The controls felt different somehow, as if his own touch had changed, as if he were seeing his surroundings with new eyes. He strapped in, his gaze lingering on the pendant around his neck, the faint pulse of the heart's energy steady against his skin. As the ship lifted off, the planet below began to shrink, its barren landscape fading into the vastness of space. But Rian knew that Nyx 7 would never truly leave him. The planet's ancient pulse, its power, and Nyla's presence were etched into his very soul. As the stars stretched out before him, Rian felt a sense of freedom he hadn't known in years. For the first time, he wasn't driven by the need to escape, to prove himself. Instead, he felt a quiet purpose, a clarity that filled the empty spaces within him. The faces of his past, the people he had left, the promises he had broken, they would always be a part of him. But now he carried them as reminders, not as weights. He reached for the pendant, its warmth a steady reassurance. It was a piece of Nyla, of Nyx 7, a symbol of the truth he had uncovered, the peace he had sought. And as he set a new course into the unknown, he knew he would face whatever lay ahead with a strength he had never known. Somewhere in the depths of space, Rian Solas felt the quiet pulse of Nyx 7, a silent guide through the endless stars. The stars stretched endlessly before Rian as he piloted his ship, the Starlance, away from Nyx 7. Silence filled the cockpit, but it was a different silence than he'd known before. A stillness that settled inside him, as if he had left his doubts and fears somewhere in the depths of that violet planet. The crystalline pendant Nyla had given him lay heavy against his chest, its faint warmth like a heartbeat beneath his skin. He touched it lightly, and as his fingers grazed the cool surface, memories of his time with Nyla flooded back. Her intense gaze, her solemn wisdom, the unbreakable bond she held with the heart of Nyx. He had thought he'd leave Nyx 7 and its mysteries behind, but he could feel the planet's pulse within him, a quiet echo that lingered, a part of his very soul. As his mind wandered, he closed his eyes, drifting into a light sleep, his breathing in sync with the steady pulse of the pendant. But in his sleep, his mind slipped into visions. Rian found himself once again in Nyx 7's cavern, standing before the heart. It pulsed in the dark, as powerful and hypnotic as ever. But this time, it seemed darker, as though its energy had shifted. Tendrils of shadow writhed around it, swirling like storm clouds. Rian, a soft voice whispered, echoing through the chamber. He turned, and there stood Nyla, her form flickering in and out of focus, as if she were caught in some distant struggle. Her violet eyes held a desperation he had never seen before, and he felt his own heart clench at the sight. "Nyla," he called out, moving toward her, but his legs felt heavy, as though the ground itself were holding him back. "What's happening? Are you all right?" "The heart is changing, Rian," she replied, her voice strained. "It's calling for you. I don't have much time. Nyx 7 needs you." He tried to reach her, but she was fading, her form dissolving into the shadows that encircled the heart. A surge of helplessness washed over him. "Nyla, wait, I thought I was free to go. I thought—" "Nothing is ever truly free from Nyx 7. Her voice echoed, softer now, almost a whisper. "You are bound to it, just as I am." The vision shattered, and Rian awoke with a start, his chest heaving, a cold sweat clinging to his skin. The cockpit lights flickered faintly, and he noticed the pendant was pulsing more intensely, its warmth growing hotter, insistent. It was as if the heart itself were reaching out to him, pulling him back across the endless void of space. Rian's hands gripped the controls, his mind racing. The vision had felt so real, too real to ignore. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but the part of him that had longed for freedom resisted. He had come so far, faced so much, to leave Nyx 7 behind. But Nyla's face, her voice calling his name. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Her last words echoed in his mind, haunting him. "Nothing is ever truly free from Nyx 7. Rian took a deep breath, steadying himself. The connection he had to Nyx 7, to Nyla, had been forged in truth and sacrifice. If she needed him, he couldn't turn his back on her now. With a swift motion, he adjusted the controls, rerouting the ship back toward Nyx 7. The coordinates locked in, and the Starlance hummed as it changed course, the engines flaring to life as he accelerated toward the distant planet. The pendant's warmth steadied, as though in approval, and he felt a strange comfort in its steady pulse. Hours passed as the ship hurtled through the stars, closing the distance to Nyx 7. Rian barely slept, his mind a torrent of worry and anticipation. He replayed his last moments on the planet, the certainty he'd felt as he'd left, and now the gnawing doubt that something terrible was unfolding in his absence. Finally, Nyx 7 appeared on the view screen, its dark surface bathed in the faint, cold light of its dying sun. The sight was hauntingly familiar, yet something felt different. A dense fog had gathered over the planet, swirling with an ominous energy that Rian could feel even from orbit. He steeled himself, guiding the Starlance down toward the rocky surface. The ship touched down near the same crystalline path he'd taken with Nyla, though the landscape seemed changed. The air was thicker, charged with an intense, foreboding energy, and as Rian stepped out, the mist clung to him, cold and damp. He gripped the pendant tightly, feeling its steady pulse guide him forward, deeper into the mist. Every step felt heavier, as though the ground itself were pulling him back, resisting his presence. Yet he pressed on, driven by the memory of Nyla's voice, the desperation in her eyes. Finally, he reached the entrance of the cavern, and he could hear it. The heart's pulse, louder and more chaotic than before, a wild, fevered rhythm that set his own heartbeat racing. Shadows danced along the walls, darker and more menacing than he remembered. Rian's breath caught as he entered the chamber and saw her. Nyla, kneeling before the heart, her body surrounded by twisting shadows, her face contorted in pain. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and terror. "Rian," she whispered, her voice faint, as if the shadows themselves were leeching her strength. He rushed to her side, his hand instinctively reaching for her. "Nyla, what's happening?" "The heart. It's different." She nodded weakly, her gaze flickering toward the heart. "It's changing. I've never seen it like this. It's as if something has awakened, something that the heart can't contain." The heart pulsed violently, and Rian felt a surge of energy radiate through the chamber, so powerful it nearly knocked him off his feet. The shadows writhed around them, growing darker, denser, their forms shifting and twisting as if they were alive. "You shouldn't have come back," Nyla said, her voice trembling. "It may already be too late." Rian's jaw clenched, I couldn't leave you, Nyla. Not after everything we faced together. Tell me what to do. There must be a way to stop this. Her eyes met his, and for a moment he saw a flicker of hope. She reached for his hand, her fingers cold and trembling. The heart, it needs balance. It's been holding something back for centuries. But now, it's slipping. He could feel the energy of the heart thrumming through her. A chaotic, untamed power that threatened to consume them both. Rian's mind raced, searching for any solution, any action he could take to save her, to restore the heart's stability. Can I give it something? He asked, feeling the weight of the pendant around his neck. Can I use the heart's own fragment to help? Nyla's gaze fell to the pendant, her eyes widening as realization dawned. Yes, it's a piece of the heart, a fragment of its balance. If you can return it, if you can reforge that connection, it may be enough. But it will demand everything of you, Rian. Could consume you. Rian looked at her, a fierce determination settling in his chest. He knew the risks, understood the weight of what he was about to do. But he would not leave Nyla, not now. Not when she needed him most. I'm ready, he said, his voice steady. He stepped toward the heart, the pendant in his hand, its pulse racing in sync with the wild rhythm of the ancient crystal. As he held it up, he felt the energy of the heart surge toward him, an intense, fiery wave that seared through his very being. The shadows closed in, their dark tendrils reaching for him, but he held firm, refusing to back down. The heart's light intensified, its violet glow filling the chamber, pushing back the shadows. Rian felt his strength waning, the energy of the heart threatening to overwhelm him. But he gritted his teeth, focusing every part of himself on restoring balance, on bringing calm to the storm. The shadows screamed, writhing in agony as the heart's light grew brighter, forcing them back. Rian felt the last of his energy slipping, his vision darkening. But he held on, pushing the pendant toward the heart, letting its power flow through him. And then, with one final blinding flash, the heart's pulse slowed, its chaotic rhythm softening into a steady, peaceful beat. The shadows melted away, retreating into the dark corners of the cavern, leaving only the faint glow of the heart and the silence of the chamber. Rian fell to his knees, his body exhausted, his breath ragged. He felt Nyla's hand on his shoulder, a gentle, grounding presence. He looked up, meeting her gaze, and saw gratitude, relief, and something else, something that needed no words. Rian's vision slowly cleared, and he found himself on his knees, the last wisps of shadow receding into the dark corners of the cavern. The heart of Nyx pulsed steadily now, its chaotic energy subdued, returned to the quiet, rhythmic pulse he remembered. He felt hollowed out, as if the heart had drawn every last ounce of strength from him. Yet there was a profound peace in the stillness that followed. Nyla's hand rested gently on his shoulder, grounding him. He looked up at her, meeting her violet gaze. In her eyes, he saw a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something deeper, an emotion that needed no words, one he felt mirrored in his own heart. She knelt beside him, her expression soft, and in that silent moment, they were simply two souls, bound by the experiences they had endured together. You saved the heart, Rian, she murmured, her voice barely a whisper, as if speaking louder would shatter the fragile calm that had settled over them. I didn't think anyone could, not even me. Rian managed a faint smile, the weight of exhaustion heavy on him. I think we saved it together. I could feel your strength guiding me. Her gaze softened, her hand still steady on his shoulder, a quiet reassurance. The heart needed you, Rian. You brought balance where I alone could not. It's as if you were meant to come here, to be a part of Nyx 7. He looked away, feeling the warmth of her touch and the gravity of her words. Nyla, he hesitated, the words catching in his throat. There was so much he wanted to say, but none of it felt adequate. I never expected to find this. She gave him a small, knowing smile, as if she understood the unspoken words in his silence. Neither did I, but fate brought us here together, and for the first time in centuries, I don't feel so alone. They stayed like that for a long moment, neither of them moving, as if they could preserve this fleeting peace forever. But Nyla's expression grew somber, her hand slipping from his shoulder as she rose to her feet, her gaze turning to the heart. Though we've restored balance, Rian, the heart's connection to Nyx 7 remains fragile. His bond has been tested, and now, so has ours. Rian rose slowly, understanding the weight of her words. The heart's power, though restored, was not the same as it had been before. He could feel it within him, a quiet hum, a presence that lingered, like a whisper calling him to remain. It was as if he had become part of Nyx 7, just as Nyla was bound to it. "So, what happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nyla turned to him, her eyes shimmering with a sadness he hadn't seen before. "The heart needs both of us, Rian. You and I have become its anchors. But that bond comes with a price." Rian's chest tightened. "What kind of price?" "I am bound to this planet, Rian. I can never leave Nyx 7, nor stray from the heart. And now, with our connection, you are tied to it as well. You have become part of its essence." The weight of her words sank in, a hollow feeling settling in his chest. He had come to Nyx 7 for adventure, for knowledge, but he hadn't realized the true cost of his journey. He understood now that he was no longer free to wander the stars as he once had. Nyx 7 had marked him, tethered him to its ancient power, and leaving would mean abandoning part of his own soul. He looked at Nyla, seeing the pain mirrored in her expression. "Is there no way? No way for both of us to leave, to—" She shook her head slowly, her gaze unwavering. "The heart has chosen us, Rian. It demands guardians to protect its balance, and we have answered that call. But there is a way to lessen the weight of that bond." His heart lifted, a sliver of hope piercing the despair. "Tell me." Nyla stepped closer, her hand reaching for his. He felt the warmth of her touch, grounding him, a quiet strength passing between them. "There's an ancient ritual, one that only the heart's chosen can perform. It would bind us to one another, sharing the burden of the heart, dispersing its power so that neither of us would bear it alone." Rian's pulse quickened, understanding the significance of her words. "A bond between us?" She nodded, her gaze softening, yet solemn. "But it is not without cost. This bond would tie our fates together, connecting our souls in a way that cannot be undone. We would be bound to each other, to the heart, and to Nyx 7, forever." The weight of her words hung in the air, and Rian felt his heart pounding, torn between his longing for freedom and the undeniable connection he felt to Nyla, to this ancient world. It was a choice that would alter his very existence, a bond that would transcend time, space, and even death. But as he looked into Nyla's eyes, he felt a calm settle over him, a certainty he hadn't known before. He understood that he had already made his choice, long before he had returned to Nyx 7. This was where he was meant to be, with her, bound to a purpose greater than himself. He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, the warmth of her touch a steady presence. "Nyla, I want this. I want to stand with you, to protect this place. Together." A single tear slipped down her cheek, and she smiled, a genuine, heartfelt expression that spoke of relief and gratitude. "Then let us begin." They moved together, stepping toward the heart, its pulse quickening as they approached. Nyla closed her eyes, her voice a low, resonant chant that filled the cavern, echoing off the walls. Rian followed her lead, his own voice joining hers, their words merging into a shared rhythm that seemed to vibrate with the heart's energy. As they chanted, the heart's light grew brighter, enveloping them both in a warm, violet glow. Rian felt the energy surge through him, a powerful, all-encompassing force that bound him to Nyla, to Nyx 7, and to the heart itself. He could feel her presence within him, a quiet strength, a steady pulse that matched his own. The ritual reached its peak, the energy swelling until it was almost overwhelming. And then, in a brilliant flash, the light faded, leaving them standing side by side, their hands still clasped, their connection deeper than words. Nyla opened her eyes, Her expression softened, a quiet joy shining in her gaze. It is done. We are bound, Rian. We are the heart's guardians. Together, Rian felt a peace settle over him, a sense of belonging he had never known. The bond between them was unlike anything he had experienced, a connection that transcended the physical, a unity of purpose and spirit. He could feel Nyla's thoughts, her emotions, her unwavering dedication to Nyx 7, and he knew that she felt his own hopes and fears in return. They stood there in silence, the heart's pulse steady and strong, a quiet assurance that they were no longer alone. They had each other, bound by a fate they had chosen, and for the first time in his life, Rian felt complete. After a long moment, Nyla spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you, Rian, for choosing to stay, for sharing this burden with me. He squeezed her hand, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I think I needed this as much as you did, Nyla. Maybe more. She chuckled softly, her laughter a comforting warmth in the stillness of the cavern. Together, they turned to face the heart, its soft glow filling the chamber with a peaceful radiance. Rian knew that the challenges they would face as guardians were far from over, that the power of the heart would continue to test them. But now, they would face it together, bound by a purpose that went beyond themselves. As they left the chamber, side by side, Rian felt the pulse of Nyx 7 within him, a quiet song that filled the silence, a reminder of the bond he would carry forever. And though his journey had brought him across galaxies, to worlds he had never imagined, he knew that his true path had led him here, to Nyla, to Nyx 7, to a place where he was truly finally home. The days on Nyx 7 passed in a serene rhythm, though time held little meaning in the vast stillness of the planet. Rian and Nyla settled into a life bound by their shared duty to the heart, each day shaped by the pulse of Nyx 7, a heartbeat they now felt as their own. It was a quiet existence, but one filled with purpose, and more than either of them had anticipated, with a deep and unspoken companionship. They patrolled the caverns, the pathways where the crystal-lined walls shimmered with the soft violet glow of the heart, ensuring that its power remained in balance. Together, they faced occasional surges of energy or strange shifts in the shadows, echoes of the ancient power that still tested their resolve. But side by side, they were an unbreakable force, a harmony forged from their shared journey. One night, as they stood before the heart, its light casting soft hues across the chamber, Rian turned to Nyla, unable to hold back the question that had lingered in his mind. Nyla, do you ever regret it? Staying here, bound to the heart, with me? Nyla looked at him, a gentle smile spreading across her face, her eyes warm. No, Rian, not once. I spent centuries alone, resigned to a fate I didn't choose. But now, with you here, it feels as though this was always meant to be. Her words resonated with him, easing the last doubts he had held on to. Their bond had given her a new purpose, just as it had filled a void within him he hadn't realized he carried. In her presence, he had found a peace that transcended any adventure, any conquest he had once sought among the stars. Nyla stepped closer, her gaze lingering on him, and in her eyes, he saw a depth of feeling that needed no words. She reached up, her fingers brushing the pendant she had given him, still resting against his chest. This pendant, Rian, it was a gift but also a promise, that no matter where you go, or what we face, we would face it together. He placed his hand over hers, holding it against the pendant, a surge of warmth passing between them. I would choose this path with you 1,000 times over, Nyla, he said softly, his voice filled with conviction. They stood in silence, their hands entwined, the bond between them stronger than ever. It was then that the heart pulsed, a gentle wave of energy spreading through the chamber, as if it, too, acknowledged their vow. The light grew brighter, enveloping them both in its warmth, a quiet promise that they would never be alone again. The energy of the heart seeped into every corner of the cavern, its ancient power embracing them, binding them further to each other and to Nyx 7. Rian felt the heart's pulse resonate within him, his connection to it and to Nyla deepening, solidifying into something eternal. Months turned into years, and Rian and Nyla became the unspoken guardians of Nyx 7, protectors of the heart's secrets. Rumors of an alien queen and her mysterious companions spread through distant star systems, tales of two figures guarding an ancient power on a remote and forbidding planet. Few dared to approach, and those who did found themselves mysteriously repelled by a force they could neither see nor comprehend. The heart had a will of its own, and Rian and Nyla's bond kept it at peace. And while they remained hidden from the galaxy's gaze, Rian found contentment beyond anything he had known. His former life, the restless wanderings, the endless pursuit of some elusive purpose, now seemed like distant memories. Here, with Nyla, he had discovered something more profound than the thrill of exploration. He had found home. One quiet evening, as they stood on a cliff overlooking the barren, mist-laden landscape of Nyx 7, Rian looked out at the darkening sky, the stars faint and distant in the violet dusk. He felt Nyla's presence beside him, steady and constant, her hand slipping into his. "Do you miss it, Rian? The stars, the endless worlds?" she asked, her voice gentle, understanding. He paused, considering her question. "Maybe once I did," he replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "But now, I realize I was never really searching for the stars. I was searching for something to make me feel whole. And here, with you, I found it." Nyla smiled, her fingers tightening around his. "As have I." They stood together, watching as the mist rolled across the landscape, the stars fading as the sky deepened into night. In the distance, the heart of Nyx pulsed gently, a quiet reminder of the journey that had brought them here, to each other, to this place of belonging and purpose. And though they remained bound to Nyx 7, the galaxy continued to spin, the stars stretching on in their endless dance. But for Rian and Nyla, there was no need to chase them anymore. They had found their own eternity, woven into the timeless rhythms of Nyx 7, and in each other's presence, they had become something more than mere explorers or guardians. Together, they were the heart's keepers, protectors of its ancient secrets, and theirs was a bond that would endure beyond the stars, a quiet and unbreakable promise etched into the very essence of Nyx 7. In the stillness of that eternal night, as the heart pulsed its steady rhythm, they knew that this was where they belonged, together, forever.